Okay. I think I'll begin. Right, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen. So we're into the fifth lecture, and you see the title, and it's Otto Wagner and Gustav Klimt with the Secession, and then the Wiener Werkstätte. I must apologize that I'm not including the artist Schiller. But it just doesn't, there's just not enough time. I mean, I should be giving 6 lectures rather than 5. Anyway, I'll try and make up for it by what I'm showing you to show you. So let's begin with a portrait. By the way, can you hear at the back? Yes. It's all right? Okay. Well, anyway, Matthew's disappeared. But, right, this is Otto Wagner again. He has no relationship whatsoever to Richard Wagner. He is the great exponent in Vienna, in Austria, but also worldwide as one of the great international modern architects of the period, the new modern style of the period. Really linked to the Art Nouveau ornament. And his major works in Vienna that you can visit today is the pavilions in the Karlsplatz, the U-Bahn stop called the Hofpavillon in Hietzing, and then these 2 apartment blocks on the Linke Wienseile. And then we've seen the Post Office Savings Bank. I'll show that again briefly, and then concentrate on the church at Steinhof, which is his greatest work, one of the great works of the era. He's an incredibly detailed, magnificent draftsman. His drawings are quite fantastically precise and almost sort of artistic, really. They've got a tremendous panache about them. And he's one of these people, which is part and parcel of the whole concept of the time, that he incorporates everything. He does the designs for the furniture, the architecture, the interior decoration, and so on. It's this complete overall totality of the art form encapsulated in a building. And the pavilions at the Karlsplatz survive by a miracle, really, because, by the way, I should mention that Otto Wagner had as his sort of bread and butter a permanent post as the architect for the railway system of Vienna. So it was obviously a lot of rather basic work that he did. But here he designs these 2 pavilions for a stop on the U-Bahn. And recently, within the last 20 years, they obviously modernized the U-Bahn, and they were going to demolish these. And there was such an outcry that they then placed the entrance to the modern U-Bahn underneath. So these have been sort of raised up on a totally artificial concrete platform. They survive. What you're looking at, there are 2 of them, exactly the same. This one is now a little museum dedicated to Wagner, Otto Wagner. And the other one behind, they face each other. The other one is a cafe. But they are the essence of Wagner's style. They're delicate, they're precise, they're extremely rich, expensive materials, marble and gold. And of course, it has all the essence of the Art Nouveau. You can see there the arch in detail on the left-hand side, these beautiful sunflowers and the exquisite sort of scrolling ornament on the outside part. So the Karlsplatz is the first of these buildings. It's actually very close to the Vienna Museum, which I've discussed, which I've shown many items. And then the Hofpavillon is, in fact, another part of the railway system. It was a stop specifically and solely for the emperor. And it was only used twice. So it's a bit of a white elephant, but it survives. You can see actually down the bottom there, you can see that that's the modern railway line underneath. And I think basically the court did not approve of the modern movement. They obviously had to accept it, but they did not approve of it. And I think by building this pavilion, it was a sort of bit of sycophancy which was one step too far. And I'm afraid Wagner, much as he would have loved to have been ennobled and given vast commissions from the imperial court, he never got them. I think they didn't approve of his style. In fact, he started off, Wagner, as a man very much within the 19th century ethos of this very elaborate, ornamental, neo-Baroque splendor. And then he moves completely to the other way when he becomes the professor of architecture at the Academy of Arts in Vienna. He's appointed in the 1890s to be the professor of architecture and remains so right up until the First World War. So there's the second of the pavilion, the pavilion or pavillon, and used twice. It's only been twice used. But this is one of the great set pieces, these two apartment blocks. They are just at the turn of the century, 1898, 1899. And they are unadorned. They have no classical decoration. They have no elaborate sculpture. They have all this essence of a simple, balanced form of the modern style developing. And they're amongst the very earliest. He's a very, very early exponent of the modern movement. And the one on the left-hand side, we're going back, is number 40, and you can see it here. And without any pediments, without any classical columns, without the elaborate... Look at the detail just on the far left there of that previous building, or a building probably of the same era, which shows a completely different attitude, where you have to add layer upon layer of ornament. Whereas here, all he does is face the building with this exquisite decoration of floral ornament in the form of tiles. And therefore it's called the Majolica House. And it is... one of the great buildings of the 20th century, basically, although just before the 20th century. Here you can see a detail. Therefore, it's not, he isn't building cheap works. He's not economizing. His building is extremely expensive and very costly. But if you see the tiles themselves, they're absolutely minute. Look at the top, you can see the tiles. They're very, very small. So to create all this out of tile work is really quite extraordinary. And of course, because it's tile, it survives, its color has lasted, and it's an absolutely magnificent example of a building built, nearly 120 years ago now, at the forefront of 20th century architecture. And then the other building next to it is number 30. Both of these, as I say, 1899, 1898, 1899. This is a corner site, so he obviously manages the corner extremely well. And of course, again, this is very much part and parcel of the whole Art Nouveau spirit, that you have these simple structures, but then you ornament it with a touch of sort of fey humor. And you can see right up at the top, of the building, right up at the top there's a detail I'm showing you of this woman who's shouting. She's got her hands up and she's shouting to us. It has no real significance other than a bit of ornament, a bit of fey sort of fantasy, a fantastic ornament. And the statue, these shouting ladies rather than screaming, these shouting ladies are by a man called Simkowitz, who we'll come across again in a moment. And then the facade of the apartment block on the corner is shown here. Exquisite decoration. These gold medallions are created or designed by a man called Koloman Moser. And Koloman Moser is a very, very important member of this advanced movement in Vienna at this time. He is responsible, as we shall see, for the Vienna Werkstätte, this great decorative art organization. So there's no lack of ornament, but it's a different ornament. It doesn't rely on exaggerated Baroque sculpture. It's got exquisite refinement. It's got very much ornament which relates to nature rather than humanity, although there's a face of a woman. And then the post office savings bank again. George Koch, and this is the square in front of the post office savings bank is called the George Koch Place Square, because George Koch was the founder of the savings bank in Vienna. And Wagner, you see again, using marble. Not everything is expensive, the facade is good marble, but then he adds to it in this rather delightful way that these are these aluminium studs which give a sort of decorative pattern to the structure. So it isn't just simply blank. Similarly, on the skyline are these two winged angels holding wreaths, which again are by Schimkowitz. And then I've shown you the interior already and one or two pieces of furniture yesterday. But let's move on then to the church at Steinhof. This is created at the end of his life in the early 1900s, and it is a church which is on the structure, the whole of the psychiatric hospital is on the perimeter of Vienna. You need to catch a tram or a bus, you need to catch a bus actually, to get there, and it is therefore virtually in the countryside. So it has been functioning as a psychiatric hospital now for over 100 years. And you can see it's very carefully, very pleasantly planned with these separate structures all within a sort of garden setting, which is obviously to give a peaceful, relaxed environment. And on top, and you don't notice it from this photograph, but it's actually on quite a steep hill. And it looks as if you could just wander up that road there. Well, I mean, when you do wander up it, you come to the end puffing for breath because it's quite a heavy, steep climb. And at the top of that hill, overlooking the psychiatric hospital, is the church. And it's the greatest example of an Art Nouveau building in the world, without any shadow of doubt. And it's designed here, as you can see, by Wagner, and it's for 1904-1907. It's square, it's got a sort of balance and harmony, it's simple. The only big sort of statement is that great dome, the gilded dome, which obviously relates back to sort of Byzantine domes of Venice and elsewhere. It has discrete and very pleasant ornament round the upper level. There are no great pediments, there are columns, but it's got a sort of reduced essence to it. And interestingly, it actually faces north-south, whereas normally a church faces east-west, but that's simply because of the lie of the land. It does function, and there do hold services there. It is not open to the public except at a weekend. You can't go there because it is part of the hospital. You can't go there during weekdays, but you can go on a Saturday morning, or you can go most of the day on a Sunday, but that's it. And even then, I mean, I didn't find it very busy on either occasion I went. Now, the facade, of course, the entrance facade is on the right-hand side, and you can see here these lovely, lovely angels. Everything about it has a sort of elegance, it has a refinement, it has also a simplicity about it, with those crosses and then wreaths alternating across above the top. The angels are by this man, Ottmar Schimkowitz, I've mentioned already. He works a lot with Wagner, and he was in fact of Hungarian stock, not Viennese, but obviously it's the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And you can see here looking up towards the two towers. And so this is the entrance facade. Normally it would be the west facade. This is now the south facade. And the two towers have statues, seated figures. And on the right-hand side, looking at the slide, is the figure of St. Severin. St. Severin is an early missionary bringing Christianity to Austria. Rather obscure man. On the left-hand side, there's a detail I'm showing you, is St. Leopold. The church itself is dedicated to St. Leopold, and St. Leopold is the patron saint of Austria. So that is why some of the emperors are called Leopold. And there he's holding, balancing on the arm of his chair. He's balancing, oopsie, I didn't mean to do that. He's balancing on the arm of his chair a model of the church. And so then you go inside, and it's this wonderful light-filled, air-filled space. It's got adornment, it's got decoration, but it just relies simply on its the big air-filled space with the dome above, the big arches on each side with these, which have stained glass windows in them. And it's very, very carefully planned. Because it's for psychiatric patients, originally it was thought that there must be certain protection for them. And for instance, there's no staircase on the pulpit. You can only reach the pulpit from behind. So just in case somebody decided to climb the staircase. Originally, the floor, the pews rather, had rounded corners, that they've been changed since. But so that people might, in case they fell, or they might hit them or hit themselves on the pews. And there are all sorts of details like that in the church. And here you can see, as we approach the high altar, the central mosaic. There are no paintings at all. It's either stained glass or mosaics. There's no painting in the interior. And that's why it's lasted for 100 years, intact, really, with this amazing gilded baldachin above the high altar, which is this touch of splendor, this touch of glory, this touch of magnificence given to the building. And here you can see a detail. Don't you just love these little angels? Little angels roundabout. I can't find them now. Anyway, you can see them. And this is all Wagner. This is all Wagner's design and concept. But the tile, the mosaic decoration at the back is, in fact, called it's the mosaic of Jesus and saints. It's called the Home in Paradise, and it's by a very obscure man called Remigius Grayling. And the story behind that is actually fairly instructive and rather depressing, really, in that Koloman Moser, this great designer who designs the two stained glass windows on each side of the church, Koloman Moser also designed the high altar piece, or the high altar decoration here. And however, he then converted from being a Catholic to being a Protestant, and therefore he was debarred from ever working again in the church. And it shows that however modern you are, and these buildings are extraordinarily modern, there was still a tremendous sort of prejudice involved in one's day-to-day life. And so therefore, Koloman Moser was fired, and there were various problems about the new design, and eventually they get a man, as you see there, this rather long-winded name, Remigius Grayling or Grayling. But it's a rather pleasing, it's simple. And you can see there Christ in the middle on each side of him, well, they're angels, and then Mary and Joseph standing on each side of him. And then the lady with the big sword there is actually somebody, a very obscure saint, called St. Dympha. I bet you've never heard of her. D-Y-M-P-H-I. Well, I'd never heard of her. D-Y-M-P-H-A. St. Dympha is Irish. And she is, for want of, if you might want to know, she's the patron saint of people who have mental problems. So that's why she's standing there. And then on the other side, facing her, is Saint Elizabeth, and you can make out St. Anthony on the right-hand side with Christ on his shoulder, etc. But I think it's very pleasing in a way. Now, here again, the stained glass windows. This is just one of them. They're the two windows, because this is a church for a charitable institution, and the one window is for the active acts of mercy, the 7 acts of mercy, where you bury the dead, you feed the poor, you clothe the naked, and so on. And then this is the window representing the more spiritual acts of forgiveness, where, well, you forgive, you have patience, and you have all these good attributes, which is represented by this window. And this is by Koloman Moser. So Steinhof is actually the most wonderful place to visit, and it's the most exquisite, relaxing. It's got a sort of atmosphere, it's got a balance and a harmony which is quite extraordinary. And there again you can see it from the approach. Just a few quotes, because when it was opened by the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was obviously very, very antipathetic towards the modern movement, and he announced very grandly, rather rudely actually, to Wagner apparently, the Maria Theresa style is still the most beautiful one, and then he promptly turned his back on the architect and walked away. And Wagner didn't find any great support from the imperial family. So then a member of parliament described it as the tomb of a Maharaja. And then the cardinal who actually opened, or who consecrated the church, with an extraordinary name, if you use it in the English word, Cardinal Piffle, but perhaps it means much more in Austrian. But he could say, he called it, stunned by its monumentality, this is a sacred place. And then I think the best quote is from a member of the lower Austrian Diet, who said, "Isn't it a nice irony of fate that more or less the first sensible building in the secessionist manner was built for the insane?" But it was built. And one must actually, I find it very extraordinary that there is, despite the fact that the imperial court was totally against the modern movement, it accepted it. It accepted it, and it allowed it to flourish in Vienna. It was one of the great places where the modern movement and the Art Nouveau style developed. And the Art Nouveau style, of course, is epitomized by the building, which is not by Wagner, but by one of his pupils, Josef Maria Olbrich. And again, it's just at the turn of the century. Again, it's just under 120 years old today. Badly bombed in the war, now restored, of course. It's cubist, it's cubic style, simple, square structure. It was designed as an exhibition center for the secession movement, of which Wagner was a member, including, of course, people such as Klimt and Koloman Moser and all the other names at the time. They were all youngish men then. And the secession is a movement that obviously is seceding from the past, a movement that is seceding from the grandeur of the empire that it was still in being at the time. And the touch of ornament, the touch of Art Nouveau sort of decoration is that delightful gilded dome, which is purely simply ornamental. It's these gilded leaves that create a dome on the building, on the roof. Here. Then the details, you can see the gilded leaves. The upper inscription reads, "To every age its art, to every art its freedom." Then the lower wording on the left-hand side is the Ver Sacrum, the sacred spring, which actually refers to the magazine that the secession movement publishes over the course of the first 20 years or so, up until the First World War. And it therefore gives us, this magazine, or this publication, gives one an enormous insight and knowledge of the people involved in the secession movement, the exhibitions they held, and so on and so forth, their ideas, and the whole concept, the whole philosophy behind the secession ideas. And then above the doorway are the three aspects of art. You have Malerei, and then architecture and plastic. So it's painting, architecture, and design, really, are the three aspects of art that they concentrate on, not music. Except that then, inside the secession building today, in a basement, is Klimt's Beethoven frieze. Originally, the Beethoven frieze was on the upper level because the secession building was always for exhibitions. And this was the 14th exhibition that was held in 1902. So they had a lot of exhibitions running along concurrently, one after the other. And originally, the photograph at the top shows that. Originally, it was on the upper level, and originally it was the ornament and the exhibition was actually to do with a big statue of Beethoven, which was positioned through that that doorway there. You can see a sort of gap there. You can't see it in the photograph, but through there you could see the whole essence of this exhibition, which was a Beethoven statue by a German sculptor called Max Klinger. So this is why it's called the Beethoven frieze. And it was running down around three sides of the room. You can see it up there. And so it's the same idea in the basement now, but the basement has been simply made to contain this frieze. The frieze was meant to be temporary. It was painted on the wall, and Klimt only expected it to last the exhibition, instead of which it was bought by a collector, and they took off the painting from the wall in 7 sections. And this collector then simply put it in a storeroom and stored it, until it was bought in 1915 by one of the great patrons of Gustav Klimt, a man called Lederer. And August Lederer, and he was one of these very advanced patrons of the secessionist movement and of Gustav Klimt particularly. Fortunately, it survives the war, because a lot of the Lederer collection was destroyed in the war. It was sequestrated, it was taken over by the Nazis. The Lederer family fled, and a lot of their paintings were lost. This one survived. After the war, it was reacquired by the heirs to Lederer, who sold it in 1973. And nowadays, in these brochures, it states very clearly that a good price was paid for these paintings. The Austrians are very conscious now of having behaved very, very badly. But anyway, so now it's displayed around a special room in the basement. And it is based upon the ideas as exposed, and this is going to be very confusing for you, as exposed by, as expostulated by Richard Wagner, the composer. Richard Wagner interpreted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. He interpreted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony as humanity's search for fulfillment. And of course, the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven, as you know, ends with that great chorus. The chorus, which the words of which are from Schiller's poem, The Ode to Joy. So this is where the composer, the German composer, Richard Wagner, interpreted the Beethoven Ninth Symphony, and this is Klimt's representation of that. So it's our search for happiness and fulfillment. So right on the one side, you start on the left-hand wall, you have these ladies with black hair. And they're not ladies at all, they're genii, they're sort of spirits. And there's a proper lady who's searching for happiness. And they're all floating along the wall. And they're searching for happiness, and then humanity finds a knight. And there is humanity, these 3 figures, nude. There's one of the ladies up top. And there's humanity. And they find a knight, they encounter a knight. And they ask him to help in their search for happiness. And there's the knight in detail, with behind him 2 ladies representing compassion, obviously on the right, and ambition on the left, these 2 faces. So the knight then leads humanity forward. But he has to lead them through what is the hostile forces. The hostile forces are the end wall, and it shows that humanity must face and overcome various dangers and temptations. So on the far left-hand side, you have the 3 ladies, the 3 nude ladies, the 3 Gorgons, behind whom are sickness, madness, and death. And the 3 Gorgons are the daughters of Typhaeus. Now, this is purely Klimt's imagination. He represents Typhaeus as a baboon. But, I mean, Typhaeus is a mythological figure, but he was meant to be human. But here, Klimt imagines him as a baboon. And then on the other side of the monster Typhaeus, you have lasciviousness, wantonness, and intemperance, beyond which, alone and desolate, is gnawing grief. And then finally, the floating genie, right up at the top there, you can just see her peering in. The floating genie represents that humanity has overcome the hostile forces. It's all, deeply sort of symbolic and philosophical, really. And there is a detail of the hostile forces, and I always love intemperance, don't you? I mean, she's really been hitting the pasta like nothing on earth. And it sort of amuses me. I mean, where did he get a model of that form? Anyway, he did, and there he is. And then the hostile forces are overcome, and humanity's fulfillment is represented by, or humanity's yearning for happiness finds fulfillment in poetry, represented by this lady playing an enormous lyre, enormous gold lyre. And then the final scene is where the angels are singing, the lovers are embracing, referring to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and Schiller's Ode to Joy, with the famous phrase, the famous line, "This kiss is for all the world." And so there's this embracing couple on the far right-hand side. That's the end of the frieze. And it is, of course, it's very, very strongly sensual. It's very strongly emotive. It's very strongly sexual. But this is his interpretation. And only Klimt could dream up this extraordinary imaginative series. And it is, of course, his calling card, really. It's one of his great works, his great philosophical works. Klimt was born into a very, very, very poor family, and he then, because of his innate talent, even as a young boy, he had a scholarship from the age of 11 rather, from 11 years onwards. He trained at the Vienna School of Arts and Crafts, and trained there for 10 years. And then we saw yesterday his very early works, which was still very much within the conservative pattern of a school of art in those days, where he was painting very much in the traditional romanticism of the era, where the studio was established with his brother Ernst and his another chap called Franz Much. And because of that, as we saw in the Burgtheater, in the ceiling painting, he was awarded the Emperor's Prize. The partnership ends, and in any case, his brother dies in the 1890s. And he retreats from public life. He never takes another public commission because of a slight that he suffered, a rejection that he suffered. He created 3 huge murals for the university. And they were of justice and medicine and philosophy, I think. And these huge murals were very sexually explicit. And they were rejected. And Klimt, by then had a certain stature and a certain confidence, was absolutely furious. And he said he'd never bother again with any public commission at all. And then he retreated into himself to the extent that he even wouldn't answer the door at times. He just stayed on his own. I forgot to tell people to switch off their phones. Then he moves very much towards a contemporary style. He was a member of the Secession. He becomes a member of the Union of Austrian Painters, and he creates the Beethoven frieze in 1902, after which he visits Italy. Italy always has such an amazing impact on artists. And because of Venice and Ravenna, with their amazing gilded mosaics, he enters his golden phase. And so here is one of the great works of his golden phase, which is in the Belvedere, and it's the story, it's the representation of Judith and Holofernes, the Old Testament story of Judith who murders the oppressor of the Jews, Holofernes. And you wouldn't know that basically, except that Klimt's brother does actually create the frame. And right up at the top there is Judith und Holofernes. But other than that, it's the most amazing representation of a very seductive woman. It's this sort of sultry fire that she sort of seems to exude. And Holofernes is simply given a walk-on part by pairing it on the right-hand side. But I found this quote, which I think very much sums up Klimt and his obsession with the female. It is impossible to imagine Klimt without women who offer themselves to him like a gift. They are Viennese women, girls from among the common people, and high society ladies. He knew them very well, lived surrounded by their scent, and became the herald of their glory. And his whole life was lived sort of in the company and in the sort of arms of women. And they are, sadly, all his records, all his letters, all his diaries were destroyed when he died, at his wishes, and destroyed, as we shall see, by Emily, who was his partner. But some people say that he sired at least 20 illegitimate children. Certainly he sired at least a dozen. And there was one year when 2 ladies gave birth almost simultaneously. And so he was quite a fellow. But this is why his paintings are always feminine, always representing the female form. And of course, this is very much Adele Bloch-Bar. Adele Bloch-Bar, the Lady in Gold. She, of course, as you know, was a member of a very rich, very intellectual society in Vienna. It was a sort of rich Jewish society who patronized the Secession, and she had her portrait painted. It is assumed, or it is not assumed at all, it is suggested that she actually had a relationship with Klimt, but there's no proof, there's no records, you see, so perhaps it's just as well. But she didn't, her life was quite short. She died in her 40s, and according to the record, there are records of this, that she asked her husband to donate this painting to the Austrian nation when he died. Which he never did, because the Second World War came along. And so this was the great dispute, because as you know, there was this huge court case, remember from the film, which I didn't think was all that good, but the film detailed the court case that was brought against the Austrian government, because Adele Bloch-Bar's niece petitioned the government to release this painting and give it back to the family. The Austrians refused because of the fact that there was this record that she had asked her husband to give it to the Austrian nation. So they had a bit of legal way there. Anyway, the Austrian courts came down in favor of Adele Bloch-Bar's niece, and the painting, of course, as you know, went to America, and it was sold to Ronald Lauder for $135 million. In fact, Lauder paid over $300 million to the family because the courts not only adjudicated on this painting, but 4 other paintings by Klimt, which again were owned by the Bloch-Bars. So all 5 of them went to the States. And I think I'm right in saying that all 5 are all 5 are in the Neue Gallery, the gallery started by Ronald Lauder. So there again, it's fascinating. You can see her bodily form, the dress and her bodily form, but then it sort of emerges out of this huge gilded splendor, this sort of gilded cage that he sees her within. And it has this compelling appeal, really. Again, her very, very realistic face with this imaginary background. And the kiss, which has always been in the government possession in Austria, interestingly, it was sold, even before it was finished, to the Austrian government, and has always been in the Belvedere. So it shows that the art world itself, not the imperial court, but the art world, were very conscious of the fact that the modern movement was a very significant movement, and that Klimt was a very, very important aspect of that, and this was therefore acquired from his studio. It's never been owned by anybody else. So there again, you've got this embracing couple, this deep, strong sensuality associated with the embrace, and it's thought, have been suggested anyway, that the lady was modelled by Emily Flöger. Emily Flöger is seen here with Klimt, and I have read that some people have suggested that their relationship was purely platonic. Well, to say that a relationship with a woman is purely platonic in relation to Klimt is the ultimate oxymoron. I'm sure, quite convinced there was a relationship, except she was, though, a very advanced lady, just like the modern movement. She was very advanced, she was independent, she didn't want to necessarily settle down as a good Hausfrau, and she had her own business on the Maria-Hilfer-Strasse, the big street, shopping street in Vienna, and they remained very strong companions and would go on holiday together every year to the Attersee. The big lake, it's the biggest lake in Austria, in the southern part of Austria. Very pretty area. And they would go there every year in the summer months. And there you can see them in a villa at Attersee. It is she who will then destroy all the records, all the personal records of Klimt when he dies. And I think rightly so. She knew too much, and she knew the world would be very interested in it all, so she decided to simply destroy it. And there she is in a painting, which is today in the Vienna Museum, and it's a life-size painting. It's very tall and it's very long. It's actually Emily entirely. Interestingly, though, obviously she didn't like it, and presumably Klimt didn't really fancy it so too much, because they sold it within 2 years of its creation to, again, the forerunner of the Austrian Museum. So again, these two great paintings, Emily herself and then the Kiss, are both acquired at the time by the Austrian government or Austrian official bodies. But when he went on holiday to the Attersee, he paints some incredible landscapes, almost entirely square. He loved the square form. Adele Bloch-Bauer is a square painting. And they are very large, as you see, 110 centimeters or 43 inches. And this one is in the Belvedere. They have a big collection of his landscapes. And I sometimes rather feel, because of the overexposure of his golden era, particularly the overexposure of the Kiss, you get rather bored with it. And I find his landscapes actually very compelling. Here, of course, these enormous trees, the power, the force, the drama of nature is so well exposed here. The building behind, normally an artist would paint a marvelous Baroque building. He simply ignores it and creates this incredible growth of the power and force of nature that you see before you. And here's another painting of the same era. This is on the Attersee. And you're looking towards a little village nestling on the shore. And this was another painting, by the way, which has been acquired only too recently by its the original family. This painting originally was owned by another very significant patron of Klimt called Zuckerkandl, Mr. Zuckerkandl. And Mr. Zuckerkandl's daughter inherited it, and then the Second World War came along, and after the Second World War it was displayed in the Museum of Modern Art in Salzburg. And only in 2011 did the government eventually hand it over to the Zuckerkandl heirs. So it's now in a private collection. It was sold because when these paintings are handed back to the family, there are so many heirs now that they have to divide the money between them. They can't otherwise create a good distribution. But this was, as I say, sold after it was returned to the Zuckerkandl heirs for $44 million. And a late work by Klimt, which is called Death and Life, and death, of course, overcomes all of us, but at the same time, Klimt gives a very positive, upbeat association of life, because there is life. There's the generations, again, just one man with a woman, but otherwise motherhood, older lady, this sort of sense of the fact that we obviously have to face death, but nevertheless we are triumphing in our own ways while on earth. This painting actually was awarded the first prize in a modern art exhibition held in Rome in 1910. But after that, Klimt, it was actually then had a gold background. And only towards the end of his life, he actually rejects his gold period, and he actually overpaints the gold, which I think is a great shame. But you can actually see a bit of the gold shimmering in the background still. But it's now in the Leopold Museum, which is part and parcel of the museum complex in Vienna. So finally, the Wiener Werkstätte. The Wiener Werkstätte is founded, as you see, by these two men, Koloman Moser and Josef Hoffmann. It was a huge organization, and it was actually financed by a man called Fritz Werndorfer. And Werndorfer paid for, it wasn't just a little tiny environment, it was a huge organization. They had factories, they produced textile mills, they had shops, and it was a huge organization producing the decorative arts in the most modern form. And of course, it sadly then sort of it comes to an end with the First World War, so much did. But before that, poor old Werndorfer eventually goes bankrupt because he was forking out so much money to this project, which obviously he agreed with, but eventually he goes to the United States and reacquires another fortune. That's not a bad story. But here is his wife, Bertha Werndorfer, with a writing cabinet designed by Moser. It was displayed in one of the exhibitions at the Secession, and it has this lovely, again, the Wiener Werkstätte is very simple, but uses expensive materials. There's no cheap and cheerfulness about it, and this would have been a very expensive item. But what I find fairly fascinating is the chair can actually slip back rather perfectly into the space of the actual cabinet itself. It has an elegance, it has a refinement, it has a simplicity about it, which is, of course, all the essence of the Wiener Werkstätte by Koloman Moser. And here, a tea set by Hoffmann, which is actually displayed in the, well, all these items are in the Museum of Applied Arts today. But I did personally like this very much, but it certainly is revolutionary, but I don't think I could. But this I do approve of. The glass, the glassware, this frosted glass, these black lines on it. This again is by Hoffmann, and obviously made. Hoffmann didn't make it. Hoffmann designed it, and it was made by a firm called Lobmar. And funny enough, on the internet, not funny enough at all, quite understandably, you can buy all these Hoffmann-designed glasses on the internet today. They're made now for public consumption, but the originals are all in museums today. Now, most extraordinarily, the greatest example of this concept, because as I say, the concept was of this Gesamtkunstwerk, where all the arts were combined into one harmonious whole. This was the whole essence of the Secession movement, and particularly of the Wiener Werkstätte. And the best example of that, this combination of the arts into one composite whole, is in a house in Brussels. It was commissioned by a man called Adolf Stocklet, and it is called the Palais Stocklet, and it dates from, as you see, 1905 to 11, and inside and outside nothing has changed since it was created, and it survives as it was. This rather bleak, rather, again, angular facade, and inside very confined, very defined spaces. This is the dining room with the friezes on each side of the long walls, and the frieze and the mosaic at the end, all by Klimt. And Klimt, in fact, his designs for it, his actual painted designs on paper, are in the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna. The original mosaics are now on the walls. Interestingly, and I don't really find it all that interesting myself, is that the mosaic is just repeated on both walls. There's no difference. I suppose this is just to create a perfect harmony, that everything is balanced and one equals the other. And of course, again, back to old Klimt and his ladies, that there's expectation on the left and fulfillment on the right. But And it's very much a sort of replay of Adele Bloch-Bauer and the Kiss, really. But it's got a very strange story, the Palais Stocklet, and it's going on as we speak. Baron Stocklet died, and his son inherited. His son then produced 4 daughters. Therefore, the granddaughters, they are the granddaughters of the original builder, Stocklet. And the 4 granddaughters are now in their 80s and 90s, and they fight tooth and nail because nobody will decide what to do with this house. It stands vacant, it stands unoccupied, it stands not derelict, but it's totally unloved. It is maintained, as you can see with this aerial photograph, but nobody lives there, nobody is allowed in, not one person is ever allowed in. We have to wait for the 4 old bags to die. Because they will not come to a decision. One or two of the 4 want to sell it and realize the money, but it's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so they can't get rid of it. So it's a catch-22 situation, and it'll be in the news eventually once they all pop off. And I think because they're apparently the next generation much more amenable, and the next generation much more flexible. And it's got to be made into a museum. It's got to be made into the example of the Wiener Werkstätte. Whether it's in Brussels or not is another matter. But there we are. But finally, just quickly, going back to Vienna. We're back from Brussels. Back in Vienna, right in the middle of the city, there is this elaborate late 19th century, ostentatious, over-the-top, neo-Baroque entrance into the Hofburg. I mean, it's bombastic. This is what the Secession rebelled against, all this excessive ornament and bombast and pompousness. Anyway, it's there in Vienna, and it's a lovely part of the whole concept of the Habsburgs. But there is the palace, the entrance into the Hofburg in the centre of town. In the square in the middle, just to position you, here, you look down onto what are Roman ruins. So that's why there's a fence there and things. So if you go across the square, past the Roman ruins, and turn round with your back to the Michaela Tor, you then look back towards this building, and you can again see the Roman ruins here. So the neo-Baroque excesses of the dying emperor face the linear, calm, balanced ornament of the modern movement on the other side. And Franz Josef was absolutely furious. And he said he refused to look at a building which didn't have eyebrows. In other words, he wanted pediments on top of the windows. And it is a very advanced building. This is a man, this is a man who didn't belong to the Secession. This is an architect who didn't agree with the ornament of the Secession, although he slightly compromises here because the marble is sort of pretty ornamental. But nevertheless, his name is Adolf Loos, and this is one of his finest buildings. There are quite a few of his buildings around. He was a very, very advanced thinker moving towards the post-First World War era. And it's now a bank, as you can see. It was originally an apartment block. Well, I think it still probably has apartments in it, but it's now a bank. And when I was there, and one of you in the audience was with me at the time, we walked into the bank there, and I got out my camera, and my word, the Gorgons appeared and shouted at this woman. Absolutely, she was straight out of Klimt's hostile forces. Will you get out of here? This is a bank. Go out. I mean, I certainly won't bank there over. But anyway, little did the silly woman know that actually you can get anything off the internet. So here is the interior. And don't you think it's absolutely wonderful? I mean, it's just like a sort of ocean liner, this great staircase with all its shiny polished wood and mirrors and things. And it survives again. It's so exciting. And there is Adolf Loos himself in the top left. And his ideas as this is almost Art Deco in a way. It's always looking towards the next generation. He's a very, very advanced thinker, as I say, more advanced even than Hoffmann and Wagner and so on. So here is one of his works, and there are made quite a few others actually. There's a famous one in Prague as well, the Villa Muller in Prague. And in fact, interestingly, also Loss, luck of the draw, purely luck of the draw, not only survived the First World War, but he also survived the terrible Spanish flu that killed, as you probably remember, as you probably know, the Spanish flu, which swept across Europe in 1918, killed more people than the whole of the First World War. And of those people killed were actually Gustav Klimt, Otto Wagner, and many others died as a result of pneumonia or whatever the flu brought with it. And so Otto Loos is a sort of one-off figure. But I want to end, just for a sort of jokey aside, in Vienna, because we've seen quite a lot of buildings. We've seen the St. Stephen's Cathedral. We've seen the great Baroque era with the palaces for Prince Eugene and others. We've seen Schönbrunn. And we've now looked at some modern buildings by Wagner and here by Otto Loos. But I want to end with the most extraordinary building in Vienna. It's called the Hundertwasserhaus. Obviously, a lot of you know it. The Hundertwasserhaus by a man called Hundertwasser, 100 water. And it is an apartment block. And he designed it, but he also worked with an architect who is now recognized as one of the creators, called Krowina. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. And it's the most visited building in the whole of Vienna. Every single busload stops and goes to it. And there you can see some of the flats itself. There are actually 53 apartments. It's council estate. It's council flats. I don't know if you can buy them. I'm not sure. But anyway, they're subsidized flats. And I mean, they look sort of amusing, and it's all quite fun because the whole building has got all this growth. They've got over 200 trees and shrubs and things all growing in and around the building, on top. But I would hate to live there because you've got the whole of humanity all the time at your window. And it's just, it was, when I got this off the internet, because I couldn't take a photograph. I mean, there were just all these people milling around all the time. So I suppose that's sort of tourism today, but anyway, it's a sort of fun thing to have. And it shows that the Viennese have a sense of humor. It shows that Vienna has an extraordinary variety of buildings. We've seen the amazing art. We've seen some of the extraordinary treasures that Vienna has on display. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed it. I've had great fun showing you Vienna. Thank you very much.